Hello and welcome to another key discussion on this ongoing series we have at Mint ahead of the Union budget in February. While 2020 was marked by an economic recession and deep economic distress, there was one other major challenge that came up for India, and that was in the form of a strategic problem with China. I use that word mildly because it's actually an ongoing conflict and it's something that India will have to think about quite carefully, especially when it marks out its budget. Here we have an aggressor who has perhaps a much larger budget that is deployed both in terms of troops, ammunition, and technology. How will India and the finance minister take that on in the union budget? Equally, do remember the conflict that we have seen, the ongoing conflict at the line of actual control, will mark every other determinant in terms of Indo-China ties, whether it's economics, trade, or even education. I have with me a power-packed panel that's going to talk about that and has deep insight both in terms of what is required for India's defense capabilities at this point, and more importantly, where the money might come from in order to buttress this situation for us. So let me introduce to you our esteemed panel for this evening. Ambassador PS Raghavan, who's just completed his tenure as chairman of India's National Security Advisory Board. That is an independent advisory body on security and strategic issues. He has also been ambassador for India to Russia. Mr. G.Mohan Kumar, who's former Defense Secretary of India and someone who's overseen the Make in India initiative, particularly in the defense sector. Dr. Laxman Kumar Behera, who's Associate Professor at the Special Center for National Security Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University at JNU. He writes on issues related to arms procurement and military spending. Dr. Rajeshwari Rajagopalan, she's a distinguished fellow and head of the Nuclear and Space Policy Initiative at the Observer Research Foundation. And she's someone who's written extensively on defense, tech, and China. And last but not the least, Lieutenant General L Narasimhan, who's former Deputy Director General for the Military Intelligence for the East, and he's also been India's defense attaché in Beijing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. As always, we try to start off with a construct of what we're talking about or what we're looking at financially, and then go deeper into the subject, which at this point is India's defense capabilities. So let me take a few steps back and line out what India's spending pattern has been over the years, and that has been a little bit disappointing for people tracking defense as a vertical. Over the past decade, the numbers actually show that India's spend has gone down. So in 2010 to 11, we were looking at defense expenditure that was roughly around 2.5% of GDP. But in the most recent budget, that number has fallen to 2.1%. Mr. Raghavan, first question to you on whether or not that spend needs to be increased, and whether this will be the time where the government does agree to ratchet it up all the way to 3%, something that defense security analysts have been saying for a long time. We need to allocate at least 3% of GDP to make a sizable impact in terms of our defense prowess.
Hello, good evening. Thanks for having me on your show. Let me put your question in a different way. I don't think we should approach national security or defense issues from the money, the method. I think we need to approach it from the other direction. We need to see what we need to beef up our national security, a wide range of issues, and then we need to see how we can find the finances for it. It's good. I mean, as a ballpark figure, you talk about X percentage of the budget, but really we need to talk specifics as to what do we require. What do we need to focus on? We need to focus on, of course, defense, weapons, arms, etc., etc. But today's wars are not only fought on land, sea, and air.
Correct.
They're fought with technology. No, so you have cyber, you have space, you have electronics, you have information. Many of these things may not actually come directly in the defense budget. So really, let's see what we require for our national security, and then see how we find the finances for it. I think we need to look at it from that perspective.
Let me ask you a follow-up question then, sir, because, it seems quite clear and there seems to be enough data about what is required. As you pointed out, I'm not sure what our efforts have been with regards to AI, because we at this point don't have any data available in terms of what the spend is. Whether you're looking at space, our spend is actually a fraction of what some of our neighbors are spending, such as China. And even if you look at the top defense spenders across the world, India is at number 3, but it's a big gap between India and China, where we're at between 67 to 70 billion dollars, whereas we have an aggressor like China that's spending anywhere upwards of 250 billion dollars. It does come back to money at some point, does it not, sir? I mean, we do have to consider the fact that we need to pump in enormous resources to address all those points that you just laid out.
No, sure. Of course, it comes to money. But before we find out how much money, we need to see how we are going to, what we need that money for. Now, you talk about defense spending. Now, if you, in fact, my colleague Mohan Kumar, who's on the show, will be able to tell us much better. Our defense spending has a mix of revenue and capital expenditure. Now, so we need to really see how much is of each, and you need to see how you can increase the spend on hardcore defense and change that proportion. For example, I mean, that's just one of the issues that you need to be looking at. Similarly, if you're looking at space, and if you're looking at technologies of various kinds, AI, for example, it's scattered across the budgets of various ministries. And some of it is simply not really above the surface, let's put it that way. So, okay. Yes, we need increased allocations, but first and foremost, we need to know how we are going to go about it. In most of these issues, it is the method that is first to be determined before you look into the money.
Okay, let me lob that to Mr. Mohan Kumar then. Mr. Kumar, the floor is yours. Do we not have a method that is clear enough, or is there a system in place? It needs to be put. It needs to be put on road. You'll have to unmute yourself, sir.
Good evening, and thank you very much for having me on the show. Yes, I think you raised a very pertinent question, because the main challenge in defense budget making itself is, the demands, and the competing demands of the various services, and then the limited resources that we have. Now, over the years, the defense budget has been increasing. I'm not saying that they are not increasing in absolute terms. In terms of rupees, it has been increasing. But as you pointed out right in the beginning, see, the share of the budget in the GDP has been going down. Last time it was about 2.04% or something like that. So, I also believe, I also generally agree that, we should not relate it to GDP too much. But then in terms of quantitative terms, see, the country is growing, and there is a growth rate that the country is going to achieve in future years also. So there should be some kind of an increase in defense budget. First of all, you should analyze the threat perceptions very carefully, because, so far we have been looking at the western borders. Now, the Pakistan was our main concern, and Pakistan, we have been, of course, the proxy war is reaching nowhere. So there is always a threat looming large on the western borders. But the threat from China, although it was there, we have been having a period of tranquility all these years after 1962, and then after 1975, I think we have been having a period of general tranquility, not much of incidents, and we were trying to, but the situation has changed. Now China has become hegemonistic, and they want to have their way, and now we cannot expect China to behave in a very predictable fashion in the days to come. So as we have already experienced. Now, countering China is a big challenge for India, because if you look at the expenditures that China incur, I mean, it's like China incurs something like $271 billion every year for its defense, and whereas India's total defense expenditure is 71. Now we have a 71 billion, and so we have a peculiar task of being ready for any threat on both the borders. Yeah, that, of course, is an issue that our national security planners will have to factor into. But the main issue in defense, which I have seen, is, of course, we have the revenue budgets, revenue expenditure has been going up like anything, and the money available for capital expenditure has been going down. Now, the capital budget has of the defense services estimates, it is now hovering around 30 or even below. I mean, so that's not a very good situation, because if the revenue expenditure is going to erode capital expenditure, we will not be able to go forward in capability building, because capability building is an extremely difficult proposition, because we have to go a long way. And I agree with my friend Raghavan in the sense that the new wars are not going to be fought in the conventional manner. So we have a overdose of technology these days, artificial intelligence, drones, and so many other things, autonomous systems, and so many other things are emerging. Now, our job is to see that we attain these capabilities in the shortest possible time. Now, capabilities will depend on what kind of technology we have. So naturally, we have to go for a higher budget, and it need not be, of course, benchmarked to the GDP, but ultimately, you have to go up and reach that level of 3% at some point of time or the other.
Yeah, I am going to touch upon many crucial points that you raised. Let me, turn to Dr. Raji on this. Dr. Raji, the figure is in place. There's been enough talk about this 3% of GDP, but we also have context about what we spent in 2020, where our defense budget was around $67 billion. But here you have a situation where we lived through a major transgression, and there have probably been extreme, oversteps on that budget. Would at least accepting the fact that we need to raise the budget amount be an admission of the fact that India now needs to get more serious about its military capabilities and its strategic plans, as was pointed out earlier?
No, absolutely, Mitali. I think this is an important point. Mr. Mohan Kumar has raised a very pertinent point, because at the end of the day, you can talk about the different technologies coming into play, and that there's going to be a high-tech war and not the traditional conventional style of warfare. But the fact is that you had a Galvan crisis really prove to you how the conventional war is still not out of the wood, and so it's going to continue. And I think from the perspective of defense modernization, for instance, the Indian defense budget has been disappointing year after year, with significant implications for national security. In fact, in 2018, the Army Vice Chief, Lieutenant General Sharad Chand, made an unusually strong case in the Parliamentary Committee on Defense, stating the difficulties of the three services in terms of on account of the falling defense budget allocations, and he cited both the internal security issues, but also the on the external front. He made a specific reference to China, which he characterized as increasingly assertive, and this was right after the Doklam crisis that he talked about in 2018. And 2 years since then, we are talking about again the defense budget issues and kind of thing, and the picture is no different. If anything, I think the pandemic has only made it that much worse. So I would appreciate, I would really hope that we would get to a 3% of the GDP, that marks some sort of a mark. But at the same time, given the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic, I think it is going to be seriously problematic in terms of expanding the amount that is available, the allocation for the defense forces, because and if that is not being done, and that really takes you to the size of the economy and the economic performance and so on and so forth. So unless you have the money to really make that allocation for the defense, you are seriously going to have this problem. And in the post-pandemic world, where the GDP has shrunk by almost 9.6% as per the World Bank report, we are still grappling with a serious problem in terms of how much money will be available for the defense forces. But this is going to, I don't think we have the luxury to make a choice between development or defense and so on and so forth, because we have, as again Mr. Mohan Kumar pointed out, we had been dealing with the problem on on the western border, and now you have a serious, significant challenge on the right as well, on the eastern front, and that is something that cannot be. In fact, the kind of activities that we have seen, it is almost kind of, the LAC is becoming more like a LOC. And the kind of predictability, the peace and tranquility that prevailed, the predictability that existed on the Sino-Indian border, you cannot take it for granted anymore. I think that dynamics has changed so rapidly over the last few years.
General Narasimhan, Dr. Raji raises a pertinent point. I mean, the first one being, have we been too complacent with military preparedness? And the second one being, is this going to be a situation where it becomes a guns versus butter debate? Or do you think, given what has happened in 2024 India along the LAC, this is now a non-negotiable topic? We have to pump in more to build our defense.
All my previous good evening firstly to everyone, and thanks for having me on the show. I go with whatever has been said so far by my co-panelists. The issue that comes up is we are today saying 3% of the GDP is enough. Tomorrow it may even increase more. So it is difficult to peg the defense expenditure to a percentage of GDP. I go with Mr. Mohan Kumar when he said that you need to understand the threat perception first and then build up the capacity and capability to face the threat perception. Have we been complacent? I don't think we have been complacent. Yes, there have been constraints on the budget. However, the budget alone is not the capability of the Indian Armed Forces. It has got many facets of training, experience, having the kind of leadership. Whole lot of things are actually put into that to become a defense capability. If you ask me whether you need more money, yes, definitely we need more money. There is no question about that. We need more equipment. We need more equipment. Definitely, we need more equipment. But the fact of the matter remains that, as Ambassador Raghavan put it earlier, we need to work out as to what is the requirement and then try to find the money for it. And that has been done in terms of long-term perspective plan. All those things are already in the pipeline. The new one is also, I am told, is being worked out. So I think we are on the way. We are on the right path. The only thing is we need to anticipate the kind of incidents that happened during this summer. This was a surprise, basically, because we didn't expect the Chinese to go back on all the agreement that they signed. That has happened in the summer. That is something that we need to keep in mind and prepare for future any incidents of this nature coming up. And lastly, I would only say that irrespective of the fact, we also look at internally that is also being done. How can we rationalize? How can we get a better bang for the buck? That also needs to be worked on. That is also being worked. So I think put together, I think we'll be on the right path. And yes, we need more money if we can get it.
Dr. Laxman, the onus of putting this into a financial context is now on your shoulders. You've been on plenty of committees for the government of India to recommend budgets with respect to military. What's the best approach to take at this point? Because my guests seem to feel that there's no point putting a figure to this and talking about a 3%. There needs to be a strategy in place. What do you think might be a sanguine way to go forward for the finance minister, being mindful of the defense threat that now stands before us? You'll have to unmute your mic, please.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm very happy to be part of this August panel, and this is going to be a quite interesting topic. Well, I think India has to follow a mixed method. So on one hand, the government has to step up the allocations for the defense, for the fact that there is a huge shortage which the defense forces are facing. In fact, if I can give a piece of statistics, in the present financial year, the shortage in the defense budget was to the extent of over 1 lakh crore. And more seriously, more disturbingly, over 52% of that shortage was in the capital acquisition fund or the procurement fund, so which the armed forces used to buy new equipment. And and the problem is so severe that the ministry is finding it very difficult to pay even for the past committed liabilities. That means those contracts which the government has said. So the situation is quite really sad on the defense budget. But having said that, I think there is a limit to which the government can actually step up the defense resources. I think that the approach would be to also look from within by the Ministry of Defense how to improve the quality of spending. And over the last, I think, over a decade or so, the quality of defense spending has deteriorated to say the least. I can give you a few statistics. In 2011-12, the manpower cost was less than 50% of the MOD's defense budget. Now, by 2021, it has actually gone up to over 61%. So that means that share has actually come at the cost of the acquisition and the sustenance budget. And that's not at all a healthy situation. So government is to find some money to spend more on the acquisition and sustenance. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense has to look from within how to improve the quality of spending. So I'm glad that the CDS is talking how to rationalize the defense expenditure. Although those suggestions have not been found acceptable by the veterans. But the bitter truth is that all over the world, be it US or the UK and other countries, they have actually rationalized the manpower, how they look at the salary and how they look at the pension. Those are the actually hard reforms India has to do. And in fact, that is a long-term plan. So whatever we do now in the manpower front, the fruits will be only be seen after 10, 15 years. But I think the steps need to be taken right now.
So just to finish up that point, Dr. Laxman, you would say, and you're right, I mean, salaries and pensions contribute about 59% of the defense budget. You would say it is unlikely the finance minister will implement the second upgradation of pensions that was planned in the OROP scheme?
Yeah, OROP, so the liability that we have seen is over 40,000 crores since it was implemented. And if the second revision is being, if it is done, then it will add another 10,000 crore to the defense budget. So whether that is sustainable, the Minister of Finance has to, Minister of Finance of the Government of India has to have to find a way out. But that is the commitment that the government has already made. It's a very delicate balancing act for the Ministry of Finance, and I hope they will find a acceptable solution which is acceptable to both the Government of India and the veterans.
Mr. Raghavan, I want to step back from this conversation about, how much we're spending to what has changed significantly in 2020 and why India needs to see this through a different lens. Because for the first time, we seem to be dealing with the very real threat of a two-front war. And, from whatever analysis and reports present themselves at this point, it looked like our planning and limited resource allocation was predicated on shorter periods of aggression. But now it looks like we have two very hot and very active borders. In that respect, sir, what would you want to see in terms of a change in strategy and strategic approach?
I don't know what exactly you mean by a change of strategy, because if you are asking whether our military wherewithal is sufficient to deal with a two-front war, I think that's a very difficult question to answer, because you really have to first question what a two-front war is, what does it mean, how likely is it, and to what extent.
So let me rephrase. Let me rephrase. What I'm asking is, are we mindful of the fact that we now might have permanent deployment along the Indo-China border? Was that something that was in the psyche of planning earlier, or you don't think a big change is required?
Now, this is something that military personnel on the ground will answer. But to what extent you will have deployment on both borders, and to what extent that means a change in the whole strategy, is something that I don't think I'm qualified to answer. But the point, actually stepping back from this, what Dr. Behera said, you need to look at the quality of defense expenditure, and you need to look at what you might call a national security strategy, which actually takes into account, and that is something that is being done, but it's being done behind closed doors, in the sense that it's only when you look at the threat perception that Mohan Kumar mentioned as well, but you look at the totality of the challenges that you have. And once again, I come back to this, and you're talking about deployment of forces on the two borders. It is not only the deployment of forces that is important. It is the technology that is important. It is the intelligence that is important. It is also the various electronic and space-based methods that are available, which also go into the defense structure. So and coming back to, again, what Dr. Behera said very correctly, the CDS is trying to rationalize, or that is his remit actually, to rationalize the deployment of manpower, to try to promote jointness, where you can actually try to see how resources, which are redundancy of resources, are prevented. The same expenditure which is in the Army, Air Force, and Navy can be sort of joined together, and a jointness will also release both capacity as well as funding. So, you look at it from, it's very difficult to say, let's assume a two-front war and therefore what we need to do for it. It needs to come from a national security strategy which actually evaluates the threat perceptions and the threats in various different ways, not simply firing across the border.
General Narasimhan, the CDS took charge on January 1st last year. What is your own sense of, what kind of rationalization has happened so far? As was just pointed out, that was the mandate in the last 12 months. What is the update that you have heard of in terms of this rationalization?
Yeah, before that, can I just answer that question on the two-front thing that you talked about?
Please, sir.
Please understand this as professionals who have been in the army for a very long time. And also, this particular issue of two-front threat has been thought about, has been worked upon for more than a decade now. If you go back to 2006-07, even around that time, the chiefs of army staff have been saying about this. So this is something which is actually not new. That is point number one. Point number two is, it is not that there is no deployment on the line of actual control. On the line of actual control, there is already deployment which is existing. As much as the infrastructure which is going forward can allow you to do that. So what we need to look at is creating that infrastructure that is more required for actually having the kind of deployment that you need to have. So this is something I would like to put it across. It is not that we are not deployed on the line of actual control. In fact, most of the line of actual control, we are actually deployed there. So both the two-front threat and the deployment are actually being thought about, being planned for, and being worked upon. I leave it at that because in the public domain, I don't want to speak more than that as far as this is concerned. As far as the rationalization process is concerned, you find even before, there are a number of studies which have been done even earlier. Even during Mr. Mohan Kumar's time, there was a transformation study that was done around that time. So the implementation process was taking a bit of time. The CDS actually has come in and he is actually looking into the rationalization process. Not only in that, plus also bringing in jointness, as Ambassador Raghavan brought out. You find instead of having 17 command level organizations, you will probably bring down to 4 or 5 command level organizations, which could actually rationalize a lot of manpower, integrate the resources, and remove the redundancy factor. Like Dr. Behera said, it is not actually very well liked by the veterans, but it is a fact that you need to look inward. Even in my opening remarks, I had mentioned this, that rationalization is very important. And that is something that is being looked into. And I think come next year, that is this year plus the next year, I think we'll see a lot of rationalization actually happening.
Mr. Mohan Kumar, you've been Defense Secretary. What is an elegant way to approach this? Rationalization has been pointed out. There has been talk of that non-lapsable fund as well, but there seem to be some differences on how the Defense Ministry versus the Finance Ministry looks at it. There has also been talk of approaching, this funding question through perhaps the route of defense bonds. What do you think might be a rational way to go forward on this?
Yeah, I think what my co-panelists have mentioned, given the points which have been given by them, I generally go along with that. But I must tell you that, first thing, it's actually, you need to have a whole, some kind of a systems approach to solving this problem. Because once you look at the defense, the entire defense domain as a whole, see, there are so many things that we need to do there. For instance, there are so many redundancies and so many things which can be economized because if I remember during 2016 we had this Shekatkar committee which was formed, and that committee had gone into rebalancing the defense budget and reducing redundancies, and they have done a very good job. And then the armed forces are in the process of implementing their process. I'm very sure that if that report is very seriously implemented, lots of savings can be effected. And besides that, see, now that the CDS is in position, we are in a position to have more convergence because of the jointness of the things. See, because by forming theater commands and other the theater commands, we are going to have a tremendous amount of convergence, and this convergence will lead to integration and subsequently economies of scale, and then it will lead to a lot of expenditure being saved, and also optimal utilization of resources, because that what Dr. Behera said, the quality of expenditure also will improve because there will be optimum utilization of resources. Now, I can give you an example, like we have recently integrated the Air Defense Command. There was some A lot of work has gone into the integration of the air defense commands. Previously all the three services had the air defense facility, and now it is now under a joint system. No, I think this kind of changes should happen so that there is more convergence and a lot of effective expenditure taking place. Now, if you're able to reduce the redundancies, we'll be able to save a lot on expenditure. At the same time, saving on expenditure alone is not the solution, because I think we nearly have to go in for absolute increase of funds available for this. Now, one of the problems is that the money that is available is very uncertain. So, you have a technical capability program for the ministry. The Ministry of Defense has a long-term integrated capability building programs, LTIPP, and so on and forth. But then those things, if you have to implement it in a serious manner, you should be able to understand, you should be able to visualize the future and visualize the flow of funds. If the flow of funds is not smooth, it will not be possible for anyone to really embark on a capability building program. So what is actually worrying us is the assured guaranteed flow of funds. And in order for this to happen, at least the least that the government can do is to make the capital resources non-lapsable. In fact, this has been strongly recommended by the SCOD, the Parliamentary Committee on Defense, and of course the Ministry of Defense. I'm afraid they took a very bureaucratic view of that, because we need to think out of the box for these things, because if procedure is different in defense, it is just for national security. So in the larger end of national security, we may have to consider it seriously, and I would urge upon the Ministry of Defense to be open-minded about this. Secondly, we also need to use whatever resources that we have. See, like the Ministry of Defense has huge land resources. See, I think they have huge land resources, and these land resources could be put to constructive and imaginative use, so that building infrastructure, building housing or something like that, a lot of monetization can be undertaken with this kind of land. Because for instance, I'll tell you, armed forces have a lot of land, prime areas in the metropolitan cities, where sometimes they're using it for storage of relatively unimportant material, and there are so many restrictions regarding that. Now, if you're able to unlock these things, and because if you want to modernize these storages, you have to move it to some other new place, maybe to a rural area or somewhere suburban area or something. We can unlock these assets and then monetize them, and then create a huge some kind of fund for utilizing for capital expenditure. So there are so many things. Then of course the defense bond, which I was mentioning, it's not a simple it's a off the cuff suggestion. I mean, it's a something which we have thought about, and then the defense funding is absolutely essential. And then if you want to go for defense bonds, I'm sure the citizens of this country will not grudge giving that kind of money to government if you are floating defense or special bonds for defense. Or you can even have a special cess, because special cess is something which we have in education cess. For instance, we can have a share of that diverted to defense, or maybe a separate cess for defense. I mean, I think this is something which we have to do, because India has to go a long way in matching the neighbors' capabilities. At least in order to stay where we are, without any, we have no territorial ambitions, but we have to defend ourselves. And the situation that is developing calls for out-of-the-box thinking. And we cannot move on with the business as usual.
Sure. Dr. Laxman, let me ask you to respond to many of these suggestions that have been placed by Mr. Mohan Kumar, freeing up the land resources or monetizing the land resources, looking at the idea of defense bonds, and perhaps even looking at the idea of a cess, which reminds one of the period of the Kargil cess. Which of these do you think seem the most doable in terms of, building the framework that we do need to going into this year?
I think these are the issues which need to be seriously considered. Bond, I think, is not a very feasible idea, because issuing bond is basically delaying the current liability, because in the future somebody has to pay. So that liability cannot be postponed indefinitely. But I agree with Mr. Mohan Kumar that land, which the armed forces are sitting on a huge area, can be monetized. In fact, there is a comprehensive CAG report which talks about how much land is misutilized or underutilized. I think a comprehensive plan needs to be worked out by the government, and the surplus land could be monetized. Another area that the Ministry of Defense or the Government of India could think of is disinvestment of the government-owned companies, particularly those companies which are under the Ministry of Defense. All the PSUs, they could be disinvested. In fact, some have already been disinvested, and the rest could be disinvested. That money can come back to the government. But the problem for the Ministry of Defense is that whatever money will come back will actually go to the Ministry of Finance. And there is apprehension that even the Ministry of Finance may not actually part away the same amount to the Ministry of Defense in its budget. So that is a fear that the Ministry of Defense has to actually deal with. But I think the most feasible solution to step up the defense in the short term would be to levy additional tax. So if I may say that we are presently paying around 10 rupees cess on every liter of petrol and diesel. So extra 50 paisa or 25 paisa could actually move up around 5 to 6,000 crore every year, and that money can be given to the Ministry of Defense and the Defense Forces for the capital upgradation. So I think these are the areas which the good part is that the 14th Finance Commission, which was actually tasked specifically to find new avenues to step up defense modernization. And I hope the Commission has already submitted its report to the Government of India. And the next budget, the Union budget, will be crucial because the Finance Minister will lay out the plan, highlighting what measures have been actually implemented by the government from the Finance Commission. So we have to wait and watch till February 1st to see how many recommendations from the 14th Finance Commission are going to be implemented.
Of course. But that's an interesting suggestion, Dr. Laxman, given the public opinion right now on petrol and diesel prices to add an additional cess. I wonder how that will go down with the general public. Dr. Raji, we haven't even scratched the surface, I think, in terms of the fact that we're dealing with an aggressor on multiple levels. How would you rate our preparedness in terms of AI or space tech, or even on countering cybercrime, which frankly has become a huge headache for the Indian government and many other governments across the world? Where would you rate our preparedness, and what do you think needs to be done on those fronts?
But I want to come in. I will come on these questions that you raised. But I think I also want to talk one when General Narasimhan talked about if we need money, if we need more modernization, yes, we need, but we are in a good place. That kind of reminded me of what General V.P. Malik, the former Indian Army chief, went on to famously say during the Kargil war, that we will fight with what we have. But I think such an approach, while facing a much larger and stronger force in China, which has become the most significant national security threat, I think will be a serious danger for India. And I think that's something that we need to kind of be mindful. And second, again, when he talked about, for instance, we have deployments on the Sino-Indian border along the LOC. Yes, we do have deployments, but I think there is a difference in the Indian focus. For instance, the Indian focus has always been on thwarting essentially the large-scale China attack. And since the 1962 war, I think this has been the approach. There have been 10 mountain divisions that has been created. We were planning to create another strike corps, but again, we ran into resource issues and so on and so forth. And that was, hopefully we will be back on that track sooner than later. But I think the problem has been that India has had a very large force, but oriented towards preventing full-scale attack. But the salami slicing that China has been doing in various parts of the in other conflicts issues zones as well. For instance, in South China Sea, they have been doing this in a much more effective manner. They have been doing on the Sino-Indian border, but not to the extent or the scale of the current attack that we have seen. So salami slicing is something that India was not necessarily entirely prepared for. We were looking at, our approach has always been for preventing large-scale conflict, and that I think this is one lesson seriously learned, because I think is that India should remain prepared for not just large-scale attacks, but salami slicing. And this time around, for instance, you have seen slicing, multiple slicing, and even thicker slicing. So we have had to reorient ourselves, the armed forces, to sort of stop these kind of tactics, and this has been more difficult. But I think there is, so I take the point that there is defense deployment, but I think the orientation has been something slightly different when you look at the Indian armed forces. On the question of the AI and where we are and space technology, AI's 5G, whole range of technology related issues, I think we are at an interesting place, because I think even on the AI front, we do look at that technology in an important, it's an important component of the, but I think currently India still remains at the initial stages of development. There are specific AI sectors within the country, but I think in terms of the overall policies to support the growth and encourage innovation, I think they are still lagging behind. In fact, 2018, a Niti Aayog paper came out talking about many of these issues. But again, I don't think we are still sorted out through many of these problems, many of these issues. India clearly recognized the AI as a technology of strategic importance, have worked on national AI strategies in a very nascent stage. But I think, and where we emphasize on, for instance, the responsible use of AI, acquiring high quality data ethically, and so on and so forth, along with issues such as data protection. And some of the sectors we are actually looking at include, for instance, agriculture, healthcare, and so on as education, smart cities, but not so much in the military or the security sector. And I think this is where China is beginning to have a bigger presence in a sense. China has been in this business for quite some time. They have a fair share of the market. But I think what should be more important from an Indian national security perspective is that China's leap in AI is not going to be just limited to civilian sectors, and they will move into the military sector as well. And I think that's where we need to be more careful. For instance, there are plans to apply AI in important security sectors such as the warfighting domain, especially on the naval warfare. They have been researching quite a bit on this front. So I think these are the kind of, we purely kind of been focusing more from a civilian perspective. And I think that's somewhat sort of a limiting in nature, because I think our adversaries are looking at the employment of AI and some of the other technologies in a security context. And I think that's something that we need to be more mindful of. On the space front, again, we are becoming more attuned to the kind of changes that are taking place in the Indo-Pacific neighborhood, but also across the globe in a sense. And I think that's where, for instance, the India's demonstration of the anti-satellite capability was a clear reflection of the kind of changing security landscape in our own backyard. For instance, for a longest period of time, we didn't look at ASAT or military space capabilities in any serious manner. But the Chinese anti-satellite test in 2007 sort of was a wake-up call for India to kind of to sort of the new threats that are emerging in our own backyard. But I think one demonstration of an ASAT capability, that is not going to be good enough. And I think that's I think the DRDO is mindful of some of these issues out there. They have talked about developing more counter-space capabilities to deny the adversaries such as China or Pakistan any kind of advantage through the use of space. But I think we are still kind of getting used to because this goes against the very grain of Indian policy, which has articulated peaceful use of outer space and non-weaponization and so on and so forth. But in tune with the changing security landscape, even within the space security sector, I think we have been kind of forced to re-evaluate our own strategy and develop appropriate military space capabilities in a sense.
Dr. Raji, I want to go back to the first part of your answer and the points you made about General Narasimhan's observations. Given the situation as it stands, and these are not numbers that I'm manufacturing, they are available from the Comptroller Auditor General, that's the data. Stocks of 55 types of ammunition is below minimum acceptable risk level at this point. Stocks of 40% of ammunition is not even enough for 10 days of intense war fighting. To your mind, what is the risk that we are running at this point if we do not scale up considerably and consistently through this year to take on twin threats? Because it's not just China. We have had multiple incursions across the Indo-Pak border as well. In fact, there's been a sharp escalation, has there not, in terms of incursions that have happened on that front. What is the risk that we are running at this point?
No, I think there's been so much written on this subject in terms of the kind of security threats that we face from Pakistan on the one hand, and also, of course, on the two-front scenario. And two-front scenario, where while it has been talked about for more than a decade or so, about close to 15 years or so, but the fact is that you are seeing in the two fronts, the LAC and LOC, in a hot conflict in real for this point of time. And the risks are really very serious. And I don't think I need to kind of this has been written so much, but I think I'm going to leave that to L Narasimhan to come out with a more from an army perspective in a sense, and the man on the ground in a sense. But I think in terms of these security threats and challenges and managing this conflict, I think that's going to be fairly serious on our national security.
Mr. Raghavan, aside from rationalization of forces, another major area of focus has been how to do this indigenously, both in terms of, defense production, technology production, as also building a climate of innovation, whether it is via ISRO or DRDO. On that front, what would your suggestions be in terms of how to do this to build scale going into 2021?
No, I was in fact going to speak about this because besides the matter of budget allocation for acquisitions, I think we need to really look at revolutionizing our acquisition processes, which are inefficient and consuming, and because of that, get budgetary, they cost overruns. So we need to actually better rationalize our acquisitions process. And there again, integrate the three services requirements and prioritize them. Rather than individually, and this again is what the CDS is supposed to do. In addition to that, we need to look very seriously at defense indigenization. No, it's a matter of shame that 70 odd years after our independence, we are still the world's largest arms importer, or second largest now, because Saudis have got ahead of us, but we'll soon reclaim the position of the largest arms importer in the world. And this. If you want to maximize your security, you need to have a vibrant defense industry. If you want to be a great power, you need to be a self-sufficient, at least partly self-sufficient in your defense capability. I think this is something that needs a great deal of attention. It's not easy because indigenization actually costs money. If you have to transfer technology, and more.
I think we've just snapped the connection. I'm going to come back to you, sir, because I think we've lost the connection with you. I will return to you. We're running short on time, only about 10 minutes to go, but I am keen on getting from all my esteemed panelists a list of what they would like to see really in terms of this budget, or at least in terms of a narrative that is set forth. General Narasimhan, let me start with you. What would be on your top 5 in terms of what you'd like to hear, either in terms of concrete proposals or even in terms of intent for bolstering defense the way it needs to over the next couple of years?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I'll cover this plus also a couple of other points which have come up in the discussion that was taking place earlier. One is, the basic thing is we need to go for technology and innovation. This is something I would like to see something catered for this particular thing, because like Raji mentioned, the thrust for the AI in China and us are entirely different. We are looking at people-centric social development kind of issues related to artificial intelligence, whereas China has given out a policy till 2030 along with funding and everything else to ensure that it becomes the world leader in AI, which includes implementation of AI in the armed forces and other things. So science and technology development and innovation is something which we need to be looking into in great amount of detail. The second thing is, please also look at quantum technologies. Please also look at cyber, which you mentioned about. Quantum technologies, China is actually going leaps and bounds. We need to catch up a lot more on that. Cyber capabilities, we need to synergize a lot more. So this is something which we need to look at. So as far as science and technology and innovation is something that is number one. Number two, infrastructure and allocation for infrastructure in the border areas, particularly towards the northern borders, is something that we need to be actually looking at. And the third thing that we need to be looking at is the rationalization process by which we need to create some more money, which was discussed earlier. Going by that, we need to have training. Training is an important aspect that we need to be looking into, and that involves a lot of money, actually speaking. Lot many things was told about real estate. Please understand, when the cantonments came up, they were outside the cities. Now the cities have grown up and caught up with the cantonments. Now you move them further to the rural areas, the city will again catch up there. So the problem that comes up is that we need to have a planned kind of deployment and planned kind of location that needs to be done. We need a lot of ranges. Something to do with the ranges, acquisition of ranges is something that we need to be looking into for training purposes. Most of the ranges are now actually getting denotified and we need to get them re-notified. Ammunition, you talked about ammunition. Ammunition is a thing that we need to be actually be looking at. This is another thing that for which we need the kind of budget and the money that we need to have. Please understand, the calculation for the ammunition has already been done. How much intense rate is required, how much normal rate is required, how much slow rate is required. These are already existing. We need to build up the capabilities of holding this ammunition and creating this ammunition stocks. So this is something I would like to be actually looking at. And lastly, of course, all this costs money, and obviously there will be some increase in the defense budget that we'll be looking at.
Mr. Mohan Kumar, you made some excellent points earlier in terms of how money could be allocated. But I want you to look at this through the lens that the general has just set forth. China has allocated 28% of its defense budget to training and maintenance, equipment 41%. We're looking at a defense budget of $180 billion a couple of years back. What can the finance minister do to allay fears about our defense preparedness?
No, I think there's nothing short of giving sufficient money for this. There's absolutely no way we can escape getting money. See, we have to get money. And some of the points which I wanted to make was that we are talking about the border issues, but in countering China, one of the most important aspects is the Navy, the Indian Ocean region and the Indian Ocean region. And in Navy, we have to go a long way. There are many things which are pending, and there are so many issues, so many things are being debated. But at least in area of getting modern weapons and then submarines and other things for the Navy, we cannot delay it any longer, because we need helicopters and so many other things, sophisticated systems for the Navy. And Navy has to get an enhanced budget, because they are trying to get 18% of the budget, but they have not been successful. And this time, I'm sure there should be better allocation for Navy. Navy is extremely crucial for India's national security strategy. Now, the other thing, of course, I will say is that this technology support, because we have to boost technology. There has to be some condition that we need to have some kind of a leapfrogging in technology that is required. And in order to do that, we need to have at least set up at least 10 missions with DRDO and the private sector working in tandem. And we should also invite the private sector to take up development issues very seriously. And we need to induct them into the process. And then we also need to induct the private sector in manufacturing in a great deal, because the strategic partnership policies and other things they're just not moving forward. They have to be given a massive push. And last but not the least, I would say the reforms in the ministry. I mean, the reforms are extremely important. We have been bringing out policy after policy. See, the new defense acquisition procedure, if you see, it has more than nearly 700 pages. Now, previously, in 4 years back, it had 430 pages. Now, you see, the number of pages are increasing. Are we actually increasing our efficiency? So, in order to bring that efficiency, one of the biggest reform that you need is in reform of the acquisition process. There is already a report available in the ministry for a detailed expert committee report is available for revamping the acquisition system ministry. And we should not lose any more time in taking up that reform. And that this is well within the hands of the Ministry of Defense. There's no money required, nothing required. It's only decision that is required. So the other point which I mentioned was a non-lapsability of funds. Because Ministry of Defense has to create an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, into which all this money will go. It has to be done. There's no other way we can build capability with a clear vision. So this calls for tough decisions, and we cannot deal with business as usual decisions. They have to be out of the box thinking and decision making. This is what I have to say.
Dr. Raji, I mean, I'm asking you the same question, but I'm putting you in a tricky spot by questioning whether the finance minister can actually acknowledge the enormity of the situation before she attempts to address, the paucity that lies in terms of our defense requirements. Would that not be the first step?
No, I think that's going to be. I think she understands the minister and clearly understands the issues. But I think the problem is, if we don't have money, then how are we going to spend that money? So that really brings us back to the basic point about the relatively poor economic condition, and that is especially in the post-COVID scenario, is going to be even more stressful. So unless the economy performs well, there are going to be serious problems, because wealth, at the end of the day, that is the material foundation for all your capacity building. So unless you have that clearly out there, without wealth, it's very difficult to build your military power or even defend yourself well, in a sense. So here I would say, unless the pie gets bigger, it is going to be a serious problem in terms of how we are going to be able to modernize our forces. In terms of emerging technology, or even emerging technology, you need more strategy, formal policies, and so on and so forth. But it also needs clear investment, whether you're talking about quantum or AI, all of that. Again, that's the thing. I hear in that particular context, given the limited pool of money that we have, I would say, especially with regard to new technologies, emerging technologies, in that private sector as a key stakeholder, in a sense, especially with cyber and so on and so forth, we have been somewhat more open. But I think even with regard to some of the other emerging technology, I think private sector can come in a big way. Even in terms of defense, I think we have been talking about involving the private sector in a big way. But I think certainly in terms of the emerging technology, there is full scope. There is a scope for private sector participation as an active stakeholder, in a sense. But I think you also need to go beyond that to look at the CDS is talking about rationalizing, reduce army size, because we don't need to have the largest army. That distinction need not be there. But I think you can go for smart sizing of the army. And I think the other aspect is to move the counterinsurgency to paramilitary forces. Again, these are force-intensive operations. It need not be done by the army itself. It can be given away to other paramilitary forces who can be given training by the army. So these are difficult decisions, but not impossible, in a sense. And if there is a clear will, the ministry, you have to have conversation between the Ministry of Defense and the MHA to talk through some of this, how this is going to be implemented, in a sense. These are not easy, but not impossible.
Dr. Laxman, 2 minutes for you. At this point, the economy needs to grow at about 18% over the next decade in order to provide all the requirements for military and not touch any other vertical. What would be a practical expectation from this union budget? What do you think we're going to hear for defense? You'll need to unmute, please.
I think given the present crisis at the border, so defense budget will see a hike. And in fact, the defense budget is witnessing a continuous hike over the years. But the problem was that the capital expenditure, which is actually key for the modernization and sustenance, was not actually increasing at a proportionate rate. So I'll be happy if the capital expenditure is hiked by at least 10,000 crore. That will give enough. That won't be sufficient, but will give enough resources for the armed forces to go about their modernization. But at the same time, I would also like the finance minister to announce some more reforms to improve the teeth to tail ratio. Now, suffice to say that the present teeth to tail ratio is not in a good shape, and Ministry of Defense is spending a lot of money on the manpower. In fact, the number of people who are actually funded from the Ministry of Defense is over 53 lakh, and 61% of that is actually the retired community. And so that number is clearly not sustainable in the long term. So some measures need to be announced to how to contain the manpower cost over the long period. And I would also like to see some reforms on the capital acquisition, the point which was being emphasized by Mr. Mohan Kumar. So the acquisition setup needs to be professionalized. So acquisition is a complex task. It deals with the contracting, engineering, it deals with finance and international law. But presently, the bureaucracy, both in the Ministry of Defense and at the service headquarters, are not actually equipped to deal with all these subjects. So we need a professional acquisition setup so that the acquisition and the modernization can actually progress smoothly. I think these are my key expectations from the next budget.
Mr. Raghavan, apologies, we got disconnected. The last 2 minutes are yours, sir. What would you want to see and what do you expect to see come the 1st of February from the Finance Minister?
Okay. Now, firstly about the budget. I mean, you see, what do you want the finance minister to announce in terms of increase in budget? I come back to my original point that, what she will announce, what she needs to announce depends on what you want of her in terms, of course, she's better equipped than most finance ministers because she was a defense minister before she became finance minister. But I come back to the issue that we need to be very clear about what we require in terms of national security. Let me make one point. The American National Security Council does not include their finance minister, the treasury secretary. There is a message in it. The message really is that you need to first find out what you require for your national security, and then you look at the finances and how you're going to find the finances for it. And I think that is the way in which we need to go for this. Now, just two other points. I mean, as far as acquisition procedure goes, I fully agree that we need to make it more out of the box, and we need to look at how best we can get the best bang for our buck. And technology. What Mohan Kumar said, I like the idea a lot. We need to have a national technology mission which brings together the multidisciplinary approaches to technology, because all technology is dual use, civilian and military. And we need to bring together technology under the Prime Minister, let us say, as a technology mission for you to be able to find defense technologies which are viable and which can be taken forward.
Fantastic points from all of you. Thank you very much. It's been a cracking discussion, and I think there have been extremely cogent points that have been presented in terms of what could be considered both as strategic approach, as was pointed out, and also nuanced financial decisions or solutions to the situation as it lies for the defense condition for India. My thanks to all my panelists for joining in. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed watching this one. We'll be back again next Monday to discuss what the budget could deliver.
Thank you.
Thank you.